How to turn on the sound system. There we go. Hello, I'm Ed Royce. I chair the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I would just thank the co-chairs of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, Mr. McGovern, who's on his way, for putting this together today, along with Representative Holmgren. And I think for many of us, it was a few years ago, for many in the international community, when this first came on people's radar in 2012, when we had some of the atrocities. About 200 Rohingya were killed at that point in time, and maybe 140,000 or so displaced. And people became aware of the conditions of the 1 million approximately Rohingya that were living in Rakhine State, and the conditions in those internment camps that are some of the most squalid in the world. Even more disturbing was a UN report last month that said that Burma's police and militia and some of the military forces had carried out operations in these camps in October of 2016, committing what can be considered crimes against humanity. Crimes against humanity in a campaign of rape and sexual abuse and brutality against ethnic Rohingya Muslim women and girls. Clearly, ethnic cleansing is the intention of these kinds of operations. And some of the survivors of these attacks were as young as 13 years of age. It's estimated that many, many hundreds were killed in this most recent wave of violence, and another 70,000 victims were driven from their homes or fled the country of Burma in the aftermath. So those living in Burma today, Rohingya Muslims, can face continued restrictions on their fundamental rights to move freely, or even to marry and to have children. They have no access to health care, to education, and without freedom of movement, they're unable to obtain meaningful employment. It's no wonder that the Rohingyas have been risking their lives to try to escape this. You have thousands that are fleeing. And many of those who flee, especially young girls, end up in the hands of traffickers. I raised the issue of Rohingya's plight with Aung San Suu Kyi when she was in Washington, D.C. Tom, I know you've raised that as well. And I remain disappointed by the continued persecution of this minority group. With the kind of impunity that we've seen towards those who've carried out these attacks. The Kofi Annan-led State Advisory Commission has done remarkable good work in its investigation, but had experienced difficulties in fulfilling its mandate because of the resistance from local government officials in Rakhine State. The Commission's initial recommendations includes the call for unfettered access for humanitarian aid organizations and the media to areas of northern Rakhine State, closure of all internally displaced persons camps, and the return or relocation of IDPs to a place where they feel safe. And that's a good start. Aung San Suu Kyi has publicly agreed to the Commission's recommendations and said that she intends to carry out prompt implementation. The international community is waiting. We should be calling for further international inquiry into the violence which occurred last October through a formal commission on inquiry at the UN Human Rights Council. We must find a way forward to improve the living conditions of the Rohingya, and the cruel mistreatment of the Rohingya Muslims must end, and the United States must prioritize the protection of human rights in our relationship with Burma. But again, I want to thank Representative McGovern for putting this commission or this hearing together today, and thank all of our panelists. And Jim?
Well, let me thank our distinguished chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee for his opening remarks. I apologize for being a little bit late. I want to wish everybody happy St. Patrick's Day. But I appreciate Chairman Royce's leadership, not only on this issue, but on so many issues concerning human rights. Anyway, we appreciate him being here this morning. And I want to welcome everybody here to the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission's hearing on the human rights of the Rohingya people in Burma. I would like to welcome our witnesses. I want to thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. It's always a pleasure to see my former colleague from the House of Representatives, Tom Andrews, and I especially want to recognize Muhammad Naim, who has traveled from Yangon to join us. Thank you so much. Representative Joe Crowley of New York, a member of the Commission and a longtime advocate for democracy and human rights in Burma, expected to be present for this hearing, but unfortunately the Democratic Caucus is being briefed by the head of the Department of Homeland Security at this very moment, so he is there. He'll try to join us later if he can. But I want to recognize his commitment to Burma and to the people and look forward to continuing to work with him on these issues. You know, the Rohingya people are a predominantly Sunni Muslim ethnic group that has lived for centuries in Burma's Rakhine State and in eastern Bangladesh. They are one of the most vulnerable and marginalized populations in Burma. They have been subjected to severe legal, economic, and social discrimination, including limitations on travel, access to education, employment, and their right to marry. More than 800,000 Rohingya have become stateless since Burma, under military rule, adopted a restrictive citizenship law in 1982. This commission has long expressed concern about the unjust and untenable situation of the Rohingya. We held our first hearing on this issue back in 2009 and have continued to pay attention ever since. We are here today because not only have things not improved, but they have gotten much, much, much worse during the last several months. Last October, after attacks by an unknown group of assailants on 3 outposts along the Burmese-Bangladesh border, in which 9 police officers were killed, the Burmese security forces undertook a clearance operation that lasted until mid-February of this year. During that action, as many as 1,000 Rohingya were reportedly killed. More than a dozen villages were destroyed. As many as 24,000 Rohingya may have been internally displaced, and between 65,000 and 73,000 fled into Bangladesh in response to the violence that was unleashed. As the operation unfolded, there were many reports that the security forces were committing grave human rights abuses. As early as November, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees described the action of the security forces in Rakhine State as ethnic cleansing and possible crimes against humanity. In February, the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, based on interviews with Rohingya in Bangladesh, documented gang rapes, extrajudicial killings, including babies and young children, brutal beatings, and disappearances by security forces in a sealed-off area in the north of the state. It should come as no surprise that military officials and the government, led by Nobel laureate Aung San Suu Kyi, have denied that any systematic human rights abuses occurred during the operation. An investigation commission set up by President Cha in December did not find sufficient evidence to take legal action. But as we will hear from our witnesses who have been on the ground in the region, the reports of human rights violations are very, very credible. So much so that the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Myanmar has called for the creation of a commission of inquiry. This most recent wave of violence comes on top of an existing humanitarian crisis in Burma and Bangladesh. In December of 2016, UN OCHA estimated that there were 218,000 internally displaced people in Burma, of whom 120,000 were Rohingya. In Rakhine State alone, some 400,000 people need humanitarian and protection assistance, and nearly 1 million are stateless. In Bangladesh, there may be as many as 500,000 Rohingya living in squalid conditions without documentation. Yet in Burma, there are consistent reports that the government is limiting humanitarian access, while in Bangladesh, there is talk of relocating the entire Rohingya population to an island in the Bay of Bengal. What we have here is another example of a man-made human rights and humanitarian crisis. The Rohingya have lived in Burma for centuries, yet they are denied their most basic fundamental rights, the same rights that Congress and administrations of both parties have sought to protect and improve over many years using bipartisan legislation and sanctions. But in recent years, we have seen a trend toward easing many of these sanctions, and last fall, as the clearance operation was underway, President Obama ended a number of restrictions on bilateral assistance to Burma. To do so, he had to certify that Burma had made, quote, measurable and substantial progress in improving human rights practices and implementing democratic government, end quote. This was surely a nod to the 2015 elections that brought the current government to power. But what about the risk of ethnic cleansing or even genocide against the Rohingya people? And as of yesterday, we have an additional problem that U.S. humanitarian assistance to the people of Burma, $50 million in FY 2016, may be drastically cut or eliminated. We would be unable to offset the consequences of the horrible abuses that the Rohingya are suffering. So in this very unhappy context, I look forward to hearing our witnesses' testimonies and their recommendations as to what to do next and what Congress should do next with regard to Burma. What we must do to support the human dignity of the Rohingya people. So I want to thank you all for being here. I would like to tell all the witnesses that we will formally submit your entire testimonies for the record, so you can feel free to summarize. I also ask that statements from the following individuals and organizations be included in the record: Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, U.S. Commission for International Religious Freedom, Refugees International, Dr. Waqar Uddin, Fiona McGregor, a journalist based in Myanmar, Burma. And our witnesses, I will introduce them briefly. I will submit your very lengthy biographies for the record. They're all impressive. But we have the Honorable Tom Andrews, who serves as the President and CEO of the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. He also served in this Congress, and we are happy to be with him today. I want to welcome Matthew Smith, who is the co-founder and Chief Executive Officer of Fortify Rights, a human rights organization that has been conducting significant investigations into the Rohingya crisis and works closely and in collaborations with organizations and individuals from communities that are directly impacted by human rights violations. Andrea Gittleman is the program manager for the Simon Scott, right? I've been saying that you've been here 100 times. I keep on struggling. Simon Scott Center for the Prevention of Genocide. She was previously she was the interim director of U.S. Policy and Senior Legislative Counsel at Physicians for Human Rights. And prior to that, she served with the Burma Lawyers Council, and we are grateful that you are here. And Muhammad Naim is an ethnic Rohingya from Myanmar and a community leader of the Rohingya people. He has done incredible work on human rights and is widely respected around the globe, and we're happy that you are here today, so we'll begin.
Chairman, we've got a 10:45 subcommittee hearing.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank the chairman for being here, and thank you for your great remarks.
Appreciate
it. Now we'll acknowledge my colleague, Congressman Tom Andrews.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Chairman Royce, thank you very much for your principal leadership on this issue. Thank you so much. Mr. Chairman, it is an extreme honor to be here today at this very timely and very important public hearing. As you have noted, the Rohingya people of Myanmar are under siege. Their lives are at risk. At least 75,000 people escaped northern Rakhine State into Bangladesh, over the Bangladesh border in just the past few months. I know I recently returned from the border, and I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to share with you through my remarks today and in a written report of my trip, which I would like to seek permission to enter into the record.
Without objection.
I would like to share with you what I heard and what I saw. Mr. Chairman, I interviewed 25 Rohingya men and women who had been subjected to what the military describes as clearance operations in Mongdao Township of northern Rakhine State. It became very clear to me, however, that the actions of the military can more accurately be described as horrific brutality, torture, and murder. The inaction and outright denials of the Myanmar government in light of these horrors, and despite documentation by several credible sources, including the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, can best be described as alarming and outrageous. In interview after interview, Survivors described to me how soldiers would surround their village in the early morning hours. Often they would separate men and boys from women and girls. The men were subjected to beatings and often forced to sit for hours shackled in the hot sun. Women and girls were also subjected to beatings. Many became victims of sexual assault by soldiers. Gang rape was common. The military units sought to inflict maximum harm on villagers with what can only be described as psychological and emotional torture. Entire families, and sometimes their village neighbors, were forced to watch sexual assaults, for example. Several of the survivors were forced to watch in horror as family members were assassinated. Some had their throats slit, others were shot at point-blank range. Some described helicopter gunships descending on their villages, opening fire on neighbors as they ran. A mother described to me how her infant son was ripped from her arms and thrown into a fire. Stories of elders, disabled people, and young children being burned alive in homes that had been set ablaze by soldiers were repeated by those who I questioned. Soldiers, were also told, would often berate villagers as the horror unfolded, telling them that they should leave Myanmar. Many of them would dance as the houses burned. The rampant violence in northern Rakhine State comes on the heels of systematic oppression over many years that have included denying the Rohingya their ethnic identity, the stripping of citizenship rights, and inhumane restrictions on movement, marriage, children, and employment, as you have noted, Mr. Chairman. The Myanmar government authorities continue to deny aid workers, human rights monitors, and journalists unfettered access to the affected region. According to UN agencies operating in Burma, the Rohingya are being denied access to adequate humanitarian aid, including thousands of children who are now suffering from acute malnutrition. Mr. Chairman, enough is enough. The United States and the world cannot sit idly by as this horror continues to unfold. We must recognize a grim reality that the government of Myanmar is loath to admit, demand unfettered access to impacted areas that has long been denied, demand that the killing and the persecution stop, and make clear that those who are responsible for this horror will be held accountable. With this hearing, you are helping to bring public attention to an issue that for too long has remained in the shadows. From your position in Congress and this very important bipartisan commission, you can help form and forge a strong U.S. response. The UN Human Rights Council in Geneva is about to consider options for addressing this caucus. They include authorizing a thorough, impartial investigation through a commission of inquiry. We fully support such action as a means of applying pressure to stop the violence and making it clear that those responsible for this horrific brutality will be held fully accountable. The United States, a voting member of the Human Rights Commission, is in an excellent position to make this a reality. While the current administration has yet to take a position on such an inquiry, it is noteworthy that Secretary of State Tillerson made his own view clear during his confirmation process, and I quote, "Not only is the mistreatment of the Rohingya a tragedy, but it also threatens to radicalize a generation of young Rohingya. The United States must support regional and international efforts to investigate abuses and pressure the Burmese government and military," unquote. Mr. Chairman, the Rohingya of Burma have been subjected to unspeakable cruelty and horror, not because of anything that they have done, but because of who they are. They deserve justice. Those who have been directing the unspeakable and systematic crimes against them deserve to be held accountable. Recognizing the Myanmar government's failure to provide either, the international community must act. The United States can do so by immediately taking a strong and principled stand at the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva and by providing strong and sustained pressure on the government and military of Burma. Thank you again for holding this very important and very timely public hearing, and for your concern, Mr. Chairman, and your advocacy for the rights, for the dignity, and for the safety of the Rohingya people.
Thank you. Mr. Smith?
Thank you.
Hit your mic, yeah.
There we go. Thank you very much, Chairman McGovern. On behalf of Fortify Rights and our partners, and as Mr. Andrews mentioned, thank you very much for organizing this hearing. We thank you also for your continued attention and leadership on these and other grave human rights issues. Fortify Rights is an independent, non-governmental, non-profit human rights organization. We've reported extensively on the situation of human rights in Myanmar. This hearing does come at a critical time. My colleagues and I at Fortify Rights recently conducted more than 70 in-depth interviews with Rohingya eyewitnesses and survivors of recent violence in Mongdaw Township. Similar to Mr. Andrews' testimony, we've documented what appears to have been a widespread and systematic attack on the civilian population by the Myanmar Army and state security forces beginning on October 9th. Our findings are consistent with the UN Flash report published last month and with UN Special Rapporteur Yang Hee Lee's report, which was delivered to the Human Rights Council in Geneva on Tuesday. That is to say, our findings are horrific. We documented how state security forces raped and killed Rohingya civilians, including infants and children, looted property, and razed entire villages, including religious structures and food stocks. We documented situations of mass gang rape of women and girls, and we have reason to believe there are a significant number of unreported rape cases as well. Army personnel opened fire on unarmed civilians with live ammunition from land and sky. Soldiers slit throats and burned people alive. I want to emphasize that state security forces carried out these violations in a consistent manner in disparate locations, indicating to us that soldiers' actions were not spontaneous or rogue. These violations appear to have been carried out as a matter of state policy. The military also arrested hundreds of men and boys, and their well-being, and in some cases their whereabouts, are unknown. The authorities have blocked access to affected areas for aid workers, journalists, and monitors. Tens of thousands of people have been denied access to life-saving humanitarian aid by design. But this is only half the story. Gross and systematic human rights violations have been perpetrated against Muslims, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, for decades. In our view, this has been a matter of state policy. The authorities still deny more than 1 million Rohingya equal access to full citizenship rights and still impose severe restrictions on freedom of movement, marriage, childbirth, and other aspects of everyday life. We believe the restrictions alone rise at least to the level of persecution as a crime against humanity, implicating the involvement of state and central government authorities. The Myanmar government denies Rohingya equal access to citizenship rights through the application of the 1982 citizenship law. It is worth mentioning, of course, that this law is discriminatory, and it has created the world's largest stateless population within the borders of a single country. Rohingya statelessness is used in turn to deny Rohingya freedom of movement, and this is destructive. These restrictions are not time-bound, they're not established in law, they're not proportionate to a specific and justifiable aim, making them inconsistent with international human rights law. Moreover, no such restrictions are imposed on nearby Rakhine Buddhist populations, making the measures discriminatory. They serve no security function in Rakhine State or in Myanmar. Moreover, as has been mentioned in 2012, tit-for-tat violence between Buddhists and Muslims escalated to targeted attacks against Muslims in Rakhine State. I was in Rakhine State shortly after the attacks in June and October 2012. There were massacres, mass graves, and mass displacement. Since then, the government has confined more than 120,000 Rohingya to more than 40 internment camps in 8 townships in Rakhine State. We continue to document avoidable deprivations in aid. We've worked closely with Rohingya individuals and communities and other communities in Myanmar, the Holocaust Museum, the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, Refugees International, Human Rights Watch, and other organizations, and there is unity in the recommendation for international action on this issue. The United States still has significant influence in Myanmar and with Myanmar authorities. We fully encourage members of Congress from both parties to work with the Trump administration to ensure the establishment of a UN-mandated commission of inquiry or similar mechanism to investigate possible crimes against humanity in Rakhine State from at least 2012 to the present. The EU submitted a resolution to the Human Rights Council yesterday that would mandate a fact-finding commission. The U.S. must stand firm and support this resolution and not let it get watered down in Geneva. We feel strongly that a commission of inquiry or similar mechanism would bolster stability in Aung San Suu Kyi's administration, even strengthen economic potential in Myanmar, stem refugee outflows, and help end impunity. We believe such a commission would also deter other atrocity crimes, not only in Rakhine State, but also in other ethnic states, such as Kachin and Shan states, where international crimes have been perpetrated with impunity as well. In my written testimony, which I've submitted, for the record, we include 10 other recommendations geared toward solutions in Rakhine State. And once again, Mr. Chairman, we thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ms. Gittleman?
Thank you.
Hit your song.
Thank you, Chairman McGovern, and members and staff of the Lantos Human Rights Commission for convening this hearing on such an urgent topic. Your steadfast leadership on human rights in Burma is important as the country faces new and growing spikes in violence against civilians. And thank you for your invitation to speak about atrocities being perpetrated against Rohingya in Burma today. Atrocities that, I must say up front, are preventable. I speak on behalf of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum's Simon Scott Center for the Prevention of Genocide. We believe that timely global action by policymakers can prevent mass atrocities. The Simon Scott Center sounded the alarm about early warning signs of genocide against the Rohingya 2 years ago after conducting an investigation into state-led acts of persecution that targeted the Rohingya population. Center staff visited what can only be described as internment camps and spoke with Rohingya who had been violently displaced from their homes. We were told of the devastating impact that official policies of persecution were having on the Rohingya, and some of those impacts are depicted here today in photos in this room. In September and October of 2016, the Simon Scott Center worked with Fortify Rights to get a sense of what may have changed in terms of the Rohingya situation since the National League for Democracy came to power. Throughout conversations with experts in the country, the overwhelming response we heard from too many people was an acceptance of a status quo. In conversations less than 1 week before the outbreak of violence in northern Rakhine State, most people who were not Rohingya claimed that there was little risk of physical violence in the area. Yet, on October 9th, Burma's military and other security forces cracked down on Rohingya civilians following deadly attacks on police officers. We were disturbed by the brutality of military action, but we were not shocked that it happened. Of course, state-led persecution and unchecked abuses by security forces are ingredients for wider violence. Simon Scott Center staff interviewed Rohingya refugees who fled northern Rakhine State and crossed the border into Bangladesh. There we heard stories of extrajudicial killing, people being shot, stabbed, or burned to death, and of rape, torture, and the destruction of villages. I spoke with one man who was 19 years old who described what happened when the military entered his village. Soldiers went from house to house as he watched from a hiding spot near his own house. He described how the soldiers approached his father, held him down, and slit his throat. The soldiers then threw his father's body back in the house and burned the house down using a device he described as a launcher. He described his hiding spot as being about 12 feet away from where his father was murdered, and how he kept hiding even as his house burned and suffered injuries as a result. This man is just one of approximately 70,000 Rohingya who have fled to Bangladesh since last October. We spoke to others who have similarly harrowing stories of mass atrocity crimes. When we asked why they thought the Burmese military had committed these brutal crimes, each respondent expressed, in one way or another, that the Burmese government hated them, wanted to hurt them, and wanted them gone. When we hear their stories, we must remember that none of this was inevitable. The time for prevention may seem to have passed, but there is still an opportunity to protect other civilians who remain at risk. Supporting the country as it moves away from military rule and mismanagement to a stable democracy is a paramount priority. The U.S. government can support Burma's nascent transition to democracy while also speaking out about mass atrocities committed by its security forces. Our leaders can do this in a few specific ways. First, members of Congress, as well as the administration, can express support for a commission of inquiry into the situation. Such support would echo, as has been mentioned, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, as well as the Special Rapporteur. Second, the U.S. government should use all the tools available to encourage Burma to dismantle the laws and policies that persecute minorities. The outbreaks of physical violence are perhaps the clearest manifestation of these state policies, but forms of structural violence that devastate Rohingya communities must also be eliminated in order to more fully protect Rohingya from future atrocities. Third, Congress can ensure that no further benefits are extended to the Burmese government, including its military, until mass atrocities cease and the Burmese government upholds its responsibility to protect all of its people. As I think back to the refugees I met in Bangladesh near the Burmese border, I think of the range of experiences the refugees shared when fleeing their village. Some relied on the kindness of neighbors and strangers, and some were exploited by those seeking to profit off of trauma. The stories mirrored those told in our own museum, which describe the varied human responses to mass suffering. The Burmese government has registered its response, one based on denials and restrictions on those who seek the truth. Now, the US government has the ability to shape its own responses to mass atrocities in Burma today. Thank you for this opportunity.
Morning, Chairman. I would like to say thank you on the behalf of Rohingya people. And we also thank you for your continued attention to the situation in Burma and leadership on this and other grave human rights issues. I'm a member of Rohingya ethnic group from Burma, and I ran for office in 2010 general election. Even though I technically won the election in 2010, I was not able to represent my people in parliament. In 2015 general election, all of our Rohingya candidates were disqualified, and the entire Rohingya population of 1.3 million people were disenfranchised and denied the rights of votes. This was the first time in history of voting in Burma that Rohingya were denied the right to vote. Even though Rohingyas were recognized among the 144 ethnic groups of Burma once allowed to be broadcast over the airwaves as an ethnic language along with other 9 other ethnic languages from 1961 to 1965, now Rohingyas are branded as illegal, undocumented immigrants from neighboring Bangladesh. Rohingyas have been facing systematic persecution from successive regimes of Burma for the last 4 decades. The widespread and systematic human rights violations against Rohingya have been documented and recognized by well-known scholars, human rights organizations, United Nations Special Rapporteurs, and others. The human rights violations have been referred to as crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, and even the crime of genocide. In June of 2012, hundreds of thousands of Rohingyas were forced to leave their homes by Rakhine extremists, and their properties were burned down and looted by extremists in front of the security forces with impunity. So far, no measures have been taken by authorities to hold perpetrators accountable. Displaced Rohingyas have been living in squalid conditions, like Chairman Roy says a while ago, for almost 5 years. The previous U Thein Sein government and now government of Aung San Suu Kyi have done little to nothing to improve their living condition despite repeated requests by the United Nations and international community. Adequate aid does not reach Rohingyas. My people are living in a miserable condition. United Nations Special Rapporteur Yang Hee Lee has repeatedly stated that the situation of Rohingyas is deplorable. In the northern part of Rakhine State, Rohingyas are facing crimes against humanity. In a recent UN OHCR flash report after an attack on 9 October by an unknown militia group. The Aung San Suu Kyi's government is justifying those attacks and has been carrying out area cleansing operation in those areas. Security forces are accused of extrajudicial killing, extortion, arbitrary arrest, and mass gang rape against the unprotected, defenseless Rohingya civilians. After intense international criticism, State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi and President U Thein Joh formed a commission led by Vice President U Mie Sui. The government keeps denying any wrongdoing of security forces and also bluntly denies and rejects reports of OHCHR, 45 Rights, Human Rights Watch, and other rights groups. In order to verify the serious allegations that have been made, we urge the international community to establish a commission of inquiry or similar mechanism in Burma through the United Nations Human Rights Council. We hope that members of the U.S. Congress and the U.S. government, as well as the international community, will support the establishment of such an inquiry in Burma. Rohingya people have been living in Burma for centuries and have been stripped of their very basic citizenship rights. The treatment of Rohingya is immoral, baseless, and unfair. In order to solve the many issues in Rakhine State, we regard to Rohingya as humbly suggest that members of the U.S. Congress help ensure authorities. There are some suggestions we'd like to make to the international community, including the United States government. The first is reinstate unconditional citizenship rights to Rohingyas according to existing laws so that Rohingya enjoy equal access to full citizenship in Burma and also respect the self-identification of Rohingya identity. Second, allow humanitarian actors safe, sustained, and unhindered access to all displaced persons and affected areas transparently and without any interruption by a local extremist group. Third, lift restriction on freedom of movement immediately and ensure the provision of basic health care, education, the right to return to place of origin, and ensure the right to livelihood so that Rohingya no longer have to rely on donations from international INGOs and organizations. Fourth, ensure peaceful coexistence with Rakhine stakeholders in order to live side by side with Rohingyas, especially grant Rohingya equal rights and equal protection under the law, regardless of their race and religion. Fifth, ensure accountability for perpetrators in order to prevent the ongoing mass exodus and forced displacement, as well as ongoing arbitrary arrest, extortion, and gang raping. Criminals must be brought to justice regardless of their race, religion, and rank. Last but not least, Rohingyas are asking to simply be a part of Burmese society like before. We want to be treated with respect, dignity, and equality, no more, no less. Rohingya do not and will not promote any hidden agendas, such as separate Rohingya state or Sharia state. All allegations to the contrary are baseless. We have been and will remain always loyal to our country, and we will protect our country's sovereignty at any cost. And finally, I would like to say that we are not here with ill intention to complain our government. We are here for seeking justice, which we are not given by our government for last many decades. Thank you so very much.
Well, thank you very much. And as you heard, there's a series that we've been calling votes, so I'm going to temporarily suspend the hearing and go vote and then come back. So I hope it shouldn't take too long. There's 2, possibly 3 votes, but that's it. All right. So relax. I'll be back. Thanks. We're back. And I apologize. These 3 votes, members are slow when they vote, so I apologize for that. Thank you very much for your testimony. I appreciate it. You know, and I think the one thing that's clear from everybody is that the situation is very, very dire, and that it demands immediate attention, and the international community needs to step up, and we need to step up as well. All of you have expressed support for the establishment of a UN Commission of Inquiry to investigate alleged human rights violations in the Rakhine State. I'm trying to think of like concrete steps that we might take here in the House on this commission to help, you know, put the pressure on at least our government to make sure that we are forcefully for that, and that any commission doesn't get watered down. Does anyone have any suggestions of what we might do? Mr. Andrews?
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
let me just say speaking out now would be terrific. The Human Rights Council is considering this literally as we speak. They will be making a decision one way or another next week. There has been a resolution introduced, but it will be, as Matt has said, attacked with amendments to try to weaken it. So establishing the strongest possible resolution calling for the strongest possible international investigation is something that the United States could have a big impact on.
Well, maybe perhaps members of this commission can, at least the co-chairs, because again, time is of the essence here, maybe we get something out at the end of the day to the to the UN, saying that you know, that we feel very strongly that this commission ought to be established and that it ought not to be watered down, you know, and so I think we will do that. But let me ask you this, and again, we want the commission, but if by chance the commission is not established, I mean, are there other recommendations that you might have for pursuing accountability for human rights abuses that may have occurred against the Rohingya? Open this to anybody.
I would just to add, Mr. Chairman, that if there is a statement that comes out, I think it would be very important that it recognize that the domestic remedies have been exhausted, and that because right now what we're hearing is that Myanmar would like more time to improve the capacity of its own investigative efforts, and those just to stress the urgency of this situation, and that those domestic efforts have lacked credibility, they've lacked independence, they've lacked the will or the ability to investigate this situation.
We've seen this movie before, and I think that's the. I mean, and I think and I agree. I mean, look, the concern is that, I mean, that the government may end up trying to find ways to stall and stall and stall, and maybe we divert our attention to some other crisis in the world, and this becomes an afterthought. I don't know if anyone else has anything they want to add.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, there have been many commissions since 2012, and none of them came up with a solid answer, solid implementation, even though some of the commission reports came up with some kind of suggestion. Now, yesterday we had the Mr. Kofi Annan's commission suggestion, since it's an advisory commission. So, as I was talking a while ago, the implementation on the commission reports are very weak. Willingness not very high, So, and because of not implementing properly for last 5 years, many commissions reports, and the situations are getting worse and worse, So, how can we guarantee that Kofi Annan Commission's recommendation will be implemented? So that's why we are urging international community to form a commission of inquiry, or the name really doesn't matter. We have to send an expert of team to the region that really things happen or not.
Right.
And that's why we are kind of requesting international community, particularly the government of United States, to pursue that commission of inquiry,
I would echo those statements, and also serve as a reminder that the draft at the Human Rights Council could move forward well, as long as the language is not watered down and it does result in a robust and independent mechanism that would allow an investigation to go forward. It's just worth saying that given the mass atrocity crimes, the sheer brutality of what is happening, this is an issue of international peace and security while also being a human rights issue. This is not an issue that needs to stay in Geneva. This is something that could fall under the mandate of the UN Security Council as well.
So you just came back, right? You've all traveled there. Tell me about the restrictions that are imposed upon you in terms of your ability to kind of investigate some of the crimes that we talked about here today. Tom?
Well, first of all, it's impossible for anyone in the international community to get to the area, Mungdo Township in northern Rakhine State, to do virtually anything.
And so the military denies you, is the military government, who denies you the?
They prohibit any foreign organizations, whether they be delivering humanitarian aid, whether they be investigating. The press can't go in. It's just firmly restricted. And then where I went, which was over the border into Bangladesh, as you know, 75,000 people or more have poured in there. But, even in that case, I was, followed. People were watching my every move, and they wanted me to know that I was clearly being watched, even though I was on the other side of the border.
Just to add that further to what Tom said, the offices under the control of Aung San Suu Kyi issue travel authorizations for international humanitarian organizations, and those travel authorizations have not been forthcoming since October. But even beyond that, it's been an issue for several years now. On the ground, it's state security forces and local officials, but what we're seeing are restrictions effectively being imposed at all levels, including Naypyidaw.
And what's their reason? I think it's putting on the record why they tell you can't travel there. What is the justification?
The justification from the government's perspective is issues of security. From our perspective, there is a lot to hide. And we know even back in 2012, at the time when I was working with Human Rights Watch, I personally documented the location of 4 mass grave sites. No forensic teams have been there to take a closer look at those. There's been no proper investigation, even dating back to then. So, but they do emphasize security. I just want to add also that in terms of access, there have been a number of diplomatic trips to northern Rakhine State. The U.S. ambassador, the UK ambassador, and the resident coordinator met with several people. We interviewed one gentleman who met with the ambassador and was subsequently shot at by the Myanmar authorities. As soon as the ambassador left his presence and near the village of Wapek, which was burned down, He went into hiding. The authorities put out a manhunt and effectively chased him out of the country. And so these types of reprisals are also common, particularly for people who are trying to document human rights violations.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Ed Royce came up with some good suggestion in 2015 of October, and he was just suggesting to to create a safe zone for the Rohingya people because of the atrocities by the armed forces over there. Prior to that one, in 2014, there was a massacre happened in the village called Duchiradan, and the whole village was wiped out, but nobody was allowed to go for investigation or something. And the commission came up with, the report of not happening anything. So that's why this is very important in our view to have an independent investigation team made up of international expert, which is very urgently needed over there. Another thing is also Chairman Ed Royce urged former Ambassador to UN, Ms. Samantha Power, to bring the Rohingya issue to the Security Council, which was July of 2016, 27th July of 2016. So United States government is working on a lot of things, and also in this case also would like to request the government of the United States to pursue the Commission of Inquiry or an independent team to go over there and facts-finding team or whatever the name to find out really what's happening over there. Atrocities are really going on, or these people are exaggerating, or the military or the security forces are really committing the crimes against humanity. This is really need to be, need to be found out. That's why we are requesting the government of the United States.
Right. But you're not suggesting that the government of the United States has been particularly forceful on this issue up to this point, are you?
Not necessarily, but we're just suggesting.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I just want to make sure. I think some of us have been pretty critical of silence and basically acquiescence, if you will, in the face of some pretty horrific reports about what's going on. And and that brings me to the point. The 2015 elections were a source of great hope, and for many people around the world. When Aung San Suu Kyi came to Congress, we were all very hopeful and clearly admired her, and she, I think we all kind of thought that, among other things, that let me speak for myself, that she would be a more powerful and forceful voice for human rights for all people, including the Rohingya. And I think it's been very disappointing that it's been silence or excuses. And at some point, everybody has to be held accountable here. And I'd be curious to get your take on, your view on to what extent has the hope that people had back in 2015 been fulfilled, and to what extent not, and how do you explain the limited success of the current government in addressing serious human rights problems like the situation of the Rohingya, and are there signs of progress that are not receiving sufficient attention that we should know about?
Mr. Chairman, I think it's very fair to say that a lot of hopes were dashed, and there's some profound disappointment among many of us, particularly in a situation where these egregious human rights violations that are met with denials. I've been around here long enough, and you certainly have been, to remember when we advocated for pressure, real pressure, diplomatic and economic pressure against the government of Myanmar under the military when Aung San Suu Kyi was under house arrest. It was very controversial. But eventually the Congress did in fact impose economic sanctions, including targeted economic sanctions in which people were being held accountable. Progress was made. The sanctions, I think, even though they were controversial at the time, I think most people would say they worked. Pressure from the United States was successful. Now, with the lifting of all of these sanctions and the lifting of economic pressure and diplomatic pressure, we're seeing the results on the ground in Myanmar. So I think one of the lessons is for us to obviously recognize that this is a difficult process moving forward as a country. There's lots and lots of challenges that Aung San Suu Kyi has. This is not a real democracy. Let me point that
Right.
out. The military controls all defense, the borders, 25% of the parliamentary seats. So they have a long way to go. But I think part of the lesson I take is that when the United States and the international community were clear and strong in providing pressure, there was movement forward. But now that the pressure has been lifted, we're now seeing dangerous movement in the opposite direction. I think that needs to be considered.
Right, and I want you all to answer the question, but also, like, what reasonably can we expect her to do on this issue? Yeah. Ms. Gittleman?
I would just follow up by saying that there was a lot of hope for the political transition, and I think there was this idea that if there is a movement towards democracy, that a lot of the other problems in the country would naturally be solved. That once there's more democracy, all the other problems that have plagued the country for decades would somehow be erased. And I think we all know that democracy in itself, especially an incomplete transition as this one is not enough to erase deep-seated hatred, violence, impunity by state actors. And when we were in Rakhine State and in Yangon in fall of last year, we spoke with people, a lot of experts from outside Burma and people interested in investing in the country were speaking so highly about new opportunities for investment and for development. And people kept telling us, you can't have development when you have mass atrocities
Right.
happening. It might work for some people, and some communities will be able to benefit from those improvements, and those are those communities who are already positioned to do so. But people like Rohingya, who are discriminated against just on the basis of their identity, will not be able to reap those same benefits. And in this stage in the transition, that kind of inequality is not something that we would want to solidify.
Smith?
Yeah, back in 2015, I was in Sitwe during on election day with our executive director, Amy Smith, and what we saw at the time were ethnic Rakhine civilians lining up to vote, and then we managed to make our way into the internment camps where Rohingya were lining up for meager food distributions. Despite that, at that time, there still was hope. People were expressing hope in Aung San Suu Kyi and in the NLD. I think it's safe to say, as my colleagues have mentioned, that hope is dwindling right now. In terms of progress, we have seen, and it has been noted, Aung San Suu Kyi's silence on these issues. What we did see post October 9th is that silence turned into a very active propaganda campaign. There have been a lot of denials of human rights violations, allegations of fake rape coming from the state counselor's office, which have been very disturbing as well. So I think, first and foremost, there is certainly a lot that Aung San Suu Kyi could do, apart from supporting an independent inquiry, apart from showing moral leadership on this issue. There are destructive restrictions on freedom of movement in Rakhine State right now. These need to be lifted immediately. And we would hope that the government of Myanmar would come around to do that, but there needs to be more pressure put on her to do that.
Do you want to add anything, Mr. Naim?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, what we have seen so far, what we have witnessed so far is almost a year. Aung San Suu Kyi already has the government. She is leading the government. We haven't seen any active role she has been playing to solve the Rohingya issue, you know. On the July of 2016, 14 July of 2016, she is at the same time chair of the Rakhine, one of the Rakhine Commission. Sorry. She directed her immigration minister and chief minister to issue the citizenship card with the Rohingya people, whoever had the previous citizenship card. It's been more than 7-8 months now. It's not implementing, and the Aung San Suu Kyi is not following the process, you know. So what we are worrying is Aung San Suu Kyi need to engage more actively, and she is pretty much neglecting the Rohingya community. We have been trying many times to meet with her. We are a registered political party, and we are a legitimate party, and we have right to meet with everyone. And we have tried, we have sent many letters, and we haven't received any single response from her so far. February of last year, I met her in person in Naypyidaw capital, and I had the opportunity to talk with her about 7-8 minutes, and I raised the concern about the situation over there, you know. And she said, oh, yeah, okay, I will invite you guys whenever times comes. You know, it's been more than a year. We haven't heard any call from her. So she need to be more active, more engaged on this issue, bringing two community together. She's the one who can solve this issue if she has a will. But so far, we haven't seen that intention in her. It is very unfortunate.
No, and especially given the fact that this situation has gotten out of control. I mean, this is incredibly serious and brutal, as you have all testified, as the reports that we have received indicate. And so this is a big deal. This is not a minor skirmish. This is a big, big deal. And you know, for people who want to question the truth within the government or in the military, there's an easy way to, you know, establish truth, and that is an independent commission of inquiry, you know, giving people access to go where they want to go and ask the questions they want to ask, you know, and I think that's, you know, that answers everybody's question. And if there's, you know, nothing there, which we all know, there's, you know, an excuse by the government, you know, that would be made clear. But the bottom line is that if you really want to know the truth, you give people the access to go and do their investigative work. Mr. Naim, I want to ask you just to get this on the record, because, you know, to what extent is there a connection between the Rohingya in Bangladesh and Islamic groups, both past and present? And are conditions in Bangladesh today likely to create increased possibilities for radicalization and recruitment by terrorist groups? And would greater amounts of humanitarian assistance to the Rohingya in Bangladesh likely lessen their chances of becoming radicalized? Because some of the stuff we're hearing from the government is, you know, aims to some of these questions, and I'd just like to get your take on that and get it on the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have been working very closely with our local people, and the attack on 9th October to the security forces is a group called Al Yaqeen. Nobody know who they are from and who they are working with. There are a lot of accusations going on that they've been trained by Pakistani Taliban and financed by the businessmen from Saudi. The accusation came from the president's office. But they have no ground evidence of that accusation, you know. And so when we're talking with the local people, nobody knows this group. And you might be witness that there are a few videos came up on the online, and these guys are no more than 5 or 10 guys in uniform, and rest of them are local kids. They even don't know what they are doing, you know. Some of them with their bamboos in their hands, holding, you know, shouting something, you know. So the accusation against the Rohingya, the whole Rohingya population, and pointing out this group, which is not fair, you know. This is justifying oppress against the Rohingya by this the attack by so-called this group, you know. So there is no, as I always said, you know, the Rohingya people in the region, in Burma, we will never ever support any kind of extremism, you know. That's why we have been living. That's how we have been proven to the world. And the first militia group, arms group formed by Rohingyas were in 50s. That group has to be disarmed and had to surrender to the democratic government of Myanmar with the help of Rohingya people, because the government trained us to attack, to fight with these guys, and we did it. And the leader was killed, and a lot of the militias had to surrender to the authorities that time, and we were accepted as one of the indigenous group of Burma. So this is out of question that this group has anything to do with the Rohingya people living in Burma, and the Rohingya living in Bangladesh. Whether they have any connection of this, we honestly don't know that. But to be honest with you, Your Excellency, Mr. Chairman, I don't think Rohingyas have any kind of intention to fight with the Myanmar government through the armed struggle. We know, and we have been witnessing that our brothers and sisters, like other group of Karen, Kachin, and Shan, been fighting for the last 6 decades and gaining nothing. So we are very serious about this issue, and this is going to be out of question, and we will never have that kind of armed struggle against our own government.
So there's a few more questions. I mean, and that is, so we want to do what we can to push for this, you know, a UN Commission of Inquiry. But in the meantime, I mean, there's currently a humanitarian crisis, and we're obviously interested in keeping as many people safe as possible. Mr. Naim, you talked about creating a safe zone,
Yes, sir.
and where would that safe zone be?
That was suggested by Chairman Ed
Right,
Royce
yeah.
in October of 2015.
Okay, what do you get, I mean, safe zones are always difficult to create, but in some cases, more difficult than others. I'm just curious what the panel thinks of creating a safe zone, to give people a place to be where they're, could be relatively certain they wouldn't be victims of violence.
That issue was raised after the 2014 massacre in Ruchiradan Mound, a village. So there are a lot of international actors and some of the Rohingya diaspora community. They have been working with the international, organization and the government, and they came up with that idea. Since our government is failed to protect us,
Right.
killing us, with the impunity, we need to get protected by the international community, So we really don't have the idea
Okay.
of how
But
and
the
how-
concept,
yeah,
what do you-
the concept, we don't really have that.
I think the best approach, Mr. Chairman, is for Rakhine State to be a safe zone.
Right.
And it can become a safe zone if the leaders, including Aung San Suu Kyi and the military leaders, establish it so. I mean, we have to hold them accountable. We have to be careful when we talk about safe zones because, as Matt had mentioned, there are internment camps. 140,000 people in Sitwe are in internment
Right.
camps. And their life is just horrific. And of course, the excuse for them remaining under those harsh conditions year after year, it's for their safety. This is a safe zone. They're being protected from the broader Rakhine community, and so they need to belong there. It's a horrible, horrible place, I can tell you. And so the track record of safe zones is not very good there, and we can declare we could put pressure on those leaders who have the power to declare the entire area a safe zone.
Right. The Obama administration agreed to resettle the most vulnerable Rohingya refugees referred by UNHCR, and more than 5,600 Rohingya refugees have been resettled in the United States in the last 5 years. Do you guys think that resettlement is a good option for the Rohingya, and what more, if anything, do you think the United States should be doing to help this population in terms of resettlement? Smith?
Yeah, I think given the fact that somewhere in the ballpark of 1% of refugees worldwide ever get resettled, to us this isn't the viable solution for the crisis in Rakhine State or in the region. It is worth mentioning that there are a number of hundreds of thousands, in fact, Rohingya refugees between Bangladesh, Malaysia and Thailand. We're documenting how Thailand still detains Rohingya refugees in situations of what appears to be indefinite detention in terrible conditions. In Malaysia's been very outspoken about human rights violations in Myanmar. I think what's inconvenient perhaps for some Malaysian leaders is that the Rohingya population faces rights abuses in Malaysia, and most Rohingya are either exploited by labor, by employers or state security forces in Malaysia. They're also unable to register with UNHCR, so the option of resettlement is even more far removed for them. But I think just to reiterate that the key right now in Rakhine State is certainly lifting restrictions on freedom of movement, unfettered humanitarian access, and an end to impunity. On the issue of security, I'll just add that it has been alleged that Al Yaqin, this so-called Rohingya militant group, it's been alleged that they are well-trained, well-organized, and well-financed. Fortify Rights has not found any evidence to suggest that is the case on the ground, and we've also not found any evidence to suggest that this organization has moral support from the Rohingya population, with few exceptions of Rohingya youth, as Mr. Naim mentioned. Thank you.
I probably should have prefaced the idea of refugee resettlement in this climate here in the United States is probably not an option, period. So it doesn't matter where you're from. You mentioned Bangladesh. Just for the record, can you comment on the government of Bangladesh's policy toward the Rohingya, and does the government of Bangladesh have a realistic plan for addressing the needs and protecting the rights of the Rohingya in Bangladesh? Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Just a few days ago at the interactive session in Geneva, when the Special Rapporteur was delivering her report, the government of Bangladesh gave a very strong statement. which we thought was overdue, very strong, very well received, calling for an independent, supporting the Special Rapporteur's recommendations effectively. That said, the refugee camps in Bangladesh are some of the worst in the world. And there are somewhere in the ballpark of 30,000 Rohingya have been allowed to register officially as refugees in Bangladesh. There are at least 500,000 Rohingya in Bangladesh. We recognize the challenges that Bangladesh would face in responding appropriately to this situation, but I would just add that there have been a number of offers over the years from the international community to support that. The argument that we often hear is that the authorities don't want to make the situation too welcoming for Rohingya because they fear more will come. The reality is that the Rohingya refugees that we've spoken to and others want to live in their homeland. They don't have a burning desire to go and live in the world's worst refugee camps in Bangladesh. They want to live home, they want to have peaceable lives, and they want their rights and ethnic identity respected. And so I think there is more that the government of Bangladesh can do to ensure that Rohingya refugee rights are respected.
And to add to that, I was in Bangladesh earlier this year and had the chance to meet with members of the government and with civil society organizations, and there was a sense of solidarity, both from government officials and from ordinary people in civil society, from faith leaders and the like, some sense of solidarity with Muslim brothers from another country. But there was also a little bit of worry about how sustainable that sense of solidarity would be, especially when the influx was at its height a few months ago. But also, those government officials also did recognize that this is an issue that needs to be dealt with within Myanmar, within Burma, that the Burmese government really does need to address the root causes of this problem. And so that, of course, is an understanding that I know has not been lost in the government of Bangladesh. I think the plan that you mentioned to relocate them is quite horrific and would not address the basic needs that the Rohingya population would require. I also don't think it's a plan that has significant international support. So I think there's more that the Bangladesh government can do to support those who are fleeing into their country. But at the end of the day, this really is something that the Burmese government must address to stem the root causes of the flight.
And do you think it's possible for them to address this issue of statelessness for the Rohingya population? I mean, given where we are right now, I mean, how do we get to that point?
In Myanmar? Well, I mean, certainly the 1982 citizenship law should be amended. One thing that I think is important is it has been recognized that there's no political climate for the amendment of that law right now in Myanmar. And our worry is that the diplomatic community, the international community, has ceased reminding the authorities that they do need to amend this law eventually. This law, as mentioned, has created the world's largest population of stateless people, and so there could be a legal fix to that. There's currently a citizenship scrutiny process underway in Rakhine State, and effectively what the authorities are doing they're coercing community members to participate in this process that they're very distrustful of. Some members of the international community and diplomatic community are very skeptical about why people are distrustful of the process. And our response to that is that, well, when homes are being burned down, when people are being killed, when the rights of the population have been violated for many, many years, naturally there's a high level of distrust in that process.
Tom?
This can be done. There's a legal remedy,
Right.
there's a political remedy, but there's no political will. And certainly there's no domestic pressure from within the country to stand up for the basic rights, including citizenship rights for the Rohingya. That is precisely why it's so important for the international community to exert itself and to provide as much pressure as possible.
Well, I'm going to give everybody a last chance to comment on anything you want, in case I want to make sure we covered all the relevant topics here. But you know, I just want to conclude before I yield to you to make your final comments that you know, as I said in the beginning, I mean, you know, we've been doing hearings on the plight of the Rohingya for a while now, and I think we can all say with certainty that the situation is worse today than when we first, started doing hearings on this. Things are getting worse. And I think it is also true that the international community, I don't think, has been as forceful as it should be. And I think, in all candor, part of the reason why is because we all have great admiration for Aung San Suu Kyi. We all had great hopes back in 2015. And we all wanted things to work out and there to be a happy ending. And we still want things to work out, and we still want her to be successful in influencing, that country in ways that will respect human rights, among other things. But the harsh reality is that things are worse. So at some point, we have to kind of get over clinging to our hopes and start dealing with reality. And the reality is that things are very, very bad, and that there can be no more free passes. And you can't excuse this behavior. Yes, we know the character of the security forces and the military, but we're at a point now where enough time has gone by where the silence from her is deafening. I mean, it is troubling. And I think we need to be, we need to support this UN Commission on Inquiry. We will get off a dispatch today, referencing this hearing and the fact that we believe that, there ought to be a strong Commission of Inquiry approved, and please do not water this down. Do not give the government more excuses to delay. But we also need to be looking at other things too. And so I look forward to working with all of you as we move forward to try to exploring other things, maybe things that we can take here or this administration can do. I mean, I don't know who's in charge of this in this new administration. So I think, we're going to have to wait a little bit to figure out, who actually can make things happen. Maybe we can tweet something and it'll happen, But we have to. But in fairness, we do have to wait till people are put into place. But there's stuff we can do right now. So I'm happy to yield to you, Mr. Naim. Why don't we begin with you? I mean, any last comments you want to make for the record? And
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We really appreciate the government of the United States been continuously supporting our cause. And there is another thing I would like to share with you is there was a resolution, House Resolution 418, the 25th of March 2014. This has come also with some suggestion. It's urging Myanmar government to end persecution against the Rohingya people, respect internationally recognized human rights for all ethnic and religion minority group, call on U.S. government and international community to put consistent pressure on the government. So that kind of recommendations, we really appreciate it. But like you said a while ago, the current government led by Aung San Suu Kyi, we are not very happy the way she is handling the issues. She's pretty much quiet. The sad part is when after the attack on the 9th of October, when the security forces carrying out area cleansing operation, she was defending that operation. The security forces round up the houses. There are a lot of allegations going on against them, rounding up the houses, burning people alive, infant and toddlers and the women tied up in the house, so that kind of things, we haven't heard anything from her. So U.S. government is very close working with the Aung San Suu Kyi government and also supporting her. And I think United States government should tell her, the honeymoon is over, and we really have to come down to the real issue, which is she need to solve the problem ASAP. This is our suggestion from.
Thank you, Ms. Gittleman.
Thank you. Well, briefly, Mr. Chairman, I think you're exactly right to say that the Rohingya are in a worse situation now than in years past. And I think one of those reasons is because the United States and others don't have the leverage that we had a few years ago. And secondly, I would like to point out that what we're seeing in terms of the violence by the military against Rohingya civilians is not a ham-handed counter-terror response or a response to insurgency that's just getting a little bit overboard. As Matt said earlier, this is systematic state policy targeting people because of who they are. And for those reasons, having more training on proper counter-terror efforts, that will not fix perpetrators who, for example, are burning people alive. That's not something that's easily trainable away. And third, that one story I mentioned from that 19-year-old man who was watching horrified and helpless from a hiding place as his father was killed. I think about that often because I think all of us here and all of us who care about Rohingya and other minorities in the country are horrified about what is happening, and we also feel helpless that there's nothing that we can do. But we aren't helpless like that man was. There's a whole series of recommendations that have been discussed here today for ways that we can really move things forward. We don't need to stand by horrified at the situation.
Smith?
Yeah, thank you very much. I would just like to add, take this opportunity to add that there are also other very serious international crimes that are being perpetrated in other parts of Myanmar, including Kachin and Shan states. We're working with Kachin civil society to better document those human rights violations that are taking place. They have been going on for quite some time. The war resumed back in 2011, and the impunity that we see in Rakhine State, we also see in the north of Myanmar and Kachin and Shan states. A note on hope, back just a couple months ago, 40 civil society organizations from different parts of Myanmar banded together and signed a statement that called for a truly independent international investigation in Rakhine State, in some ways reiterating the calls that have been made by Nobel laureates and others that we've discussed today. I think what's noteworthy about that, though, is that these were not Rakhine or Rohingya organizations. These were organizations representing many different ethnicities. And we would hope that the government of Myanmar could take a lesson from Myanmar's own civil society and address this situation with some urgency. Thank you very much, sir, for the opportunity today.
Thank you. Tom?
Mr. Chairman, I think first of all, having this hearing is a very important step forward. We have to put the light of day on these atrocities if we're going to have any hope of seeing them end. Number two, we need pressure, sustained pressure. And I can tell you from my organization, the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, we are deeply, deeply concerned about what's happening in Myanmar and other parts of the world, and we are not going to be bashful about communicating these concerns to members of Congress. We encourage you to make statements, to hold further hearings, to conduct investigations, and to put as much pressure as possible on our government, who in turn can put pressure on the authorities in Myanmar to end these atrocities. We know from history that pressure works. And I think if there was ever a time to address a horrendous situation that we've been describing today, it is here and it is now. And it's key, I think, that the United States take a strong stand today, but keep that pressure going in a variety of ways moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you all very much. I appreciate your being here and your testimony and your patience. And this was an excellent hearing, and I look forward to working with you. The hearing is adjourned.